what is the landscape that of the social sector that we see. The reason why I found this helpful is when I was stepping into the space of the social sector in a full-time capacity, it wasn't often easy to figure out what my options are. Right? You just hear a bunch of names, you know the 20 organizations whose names that you remember. But how do you categorize them? How do you understand what they do, where they operate? I want to start with saying that actually every entity has a social impact. Every organization is a social impact organization. All these organizations on the right are social impact organizations. And our definition of the social sector is a very limiting definition. And the way to understand the nature, often a useful question to ask is, rather than is it good or bad, which is a very unidimensional way of thinking about it, ask the question, who does this work benefit? Who does it harm? Because somebody always benefits, somebody always gets harmed. There are a subset of those organizations that um, that say that their work is focused on marginalized communities more squarely. It's centered on the planet or marginalized communities and trying to make it better in their definition of the term. And that is what we call the social sector, essentially. Now, if you anchor on those beneficiaries and the planet as who you are acting on, I guess I assess that there are three types of organizations that exist that do that. First is the doers, right? This can be for-profit or non-profit. And of course, there are also the doers who actually act on this, which is the government and corporates, but we usually do, and the academia, all of these are doers who work on this. Then you have what I call the payers. You have CSR teams within corporates. You have national, international foundations there. You have high net worth individuals. These are people who have capital, financial capital, who fund these doers. And then you have the third category of intermediaries. Intermediaries are consulting firms, impact investors, incubators, accelerators, training organizations, capacity building organizations, an ecosystem of players who support, who are essentially in many ways lubricating this system, right? So, for example, when you help nonprofits work with each other, collectively work together, set up, creating the collective requires energy. So you become the flywheel supporting that. Or you have a payer who is asking the question, who should I fund? Or help me strengthen my operations to figure out the funding. And that's where these intermediaries play, right? And characteristics wise, if you look at it, doers, I would split them into two types. You've got grassroots players and systemic players. They are usually closer to the point of impact. So you have a larger exposure to the point of impact. But the characteristic is that there are so many of them, it is hard to know who does good work, who does bad work, if I may, like, or who's attempting well and who's attempting not so well. And typically, because they are closest to the point of impact and farthest from the source of funds, you usually end up having the lowest salary ranges, especially across a lifetime, right? So what you would hear is that at the mid-level between a corporate and a nonprofit, you have comparability of salaries typically. But the differentiation is that it's an exponential growth curve usually in for-profit setups, while in non-profit setups, it is often a plateauing range of salaries that you reach at the mid-level. So intermediaries, like I was sharing, they provide the lubrication for the system. What the value of working in an intermediary is that you get a wide angle view. The sort of problems that you will work on will keep changing because you're not tied to one cause or tied to one particular organization, but you are more distanced from the impact. You might usually work on project cycles or portfolios which keep changing every 1-2 years versus staying at it perseverantly for the long term. So you're limited neck on the line, as I call it, and limited continuity to the problems that you are solving. And in many ways, it is second-hand meaning making. You are not making sense of the lived experiences of the communities that you work for, but often the lived experiences of the organizations. Often you are absorbing things from conversations with experts, conversation with people who understand, and you have limited direct interface with communities. So it's important to, if you work there, also make sure you get enough exposure. And finally, how do payers work? Payers often are offshoots of people who've made a lot of money. So which is to say, classic example might be Gates Foundation, which is built on the success of the Microsoft enterprise. And so that's your classic example of a pair, right? So they have the source of funding coming from some other for-profit space. And they often, what is important to understand is it is often not starting with what is good work, but starting with their own thesis of impact. So they are like, I want to work on X and Y and Z in ABC geography. Who are the organizations who I can leverage to make this happen? There are organizations which just give funding and do nothing else, and they don't even want their name up on their website. And so the cycle is entirely about figuring out the right orgs. And there are organizations which take a much more partner orientation, who work with the organizations to strengthen that.